Noah Carter pulled his collar tighter, shoulders hunched against the brittle cold of a Seattle night. The wind slipped through narrow gaps between rows of temporary shelters on the city's outskirts, carrying the scent of damp soil and rusted steel, and with it, the memories he had tried so hard to lock away for months. There was no purpose, no destination, only a pair of restless feet that hadn't stopped moving since the night everything collapsed. His apartment, once filled with laughter, scattered toys, and the warm glow of a floor lamp, was now just a hollow shell echoing with silent ghosts. He couldn't stay there long. Every corner held a memory. Every breath tasted like what should have been. The doctor had called it post-traumatic stress disorder. Noah only called it a void without a name. He used to be a structural engineer, precise, rational, steady like the bridges he drafted day after day. But after the car accident that took his wife and young daughter, every structure inside him crumbled too. Not a second passed without the shimmer of Emily's chestnut hair or the tiny fingers of Lily brushing against the walls of his heart. So each night, when the city lay asleep, he walked. No flashlight. No reason. Just footsteps, slow and steady, as if pausing would allow the grief to catch up. December in Seattle was unforgiving. Icy winds slithered beneath his coat sleeves, biting at his wrists, cheeks, and the space between his fingers. Snow had not yet fallen, but the cold had already settled deep into the bones. A faint yellow light from an abandoned repair shop flickered in the distance, reflected in a frozen puddle like shards of trembling glass. Noah walked past without looking down. His mind was filled with the wail of sirens, the doctor's final words. That last sentence, "I'm sorry, we did everything we could." His pace slowed. A sudden gust of wind cut across his face, stinging his eyes. He couldn't tell if it was the cold or the closeness of memory. He sank onto a cement step behind an old warehouse, his back against a wall of freezing brick, hands gripping the hem of his coat. The rush of memory left him shaking. He knew the chill wasn't the only thing making him tremble. Then, a sound. Barely there. Fragile. Like the sharp, ragged breath of something forgotten by the world. Noah turned his head. And in the tightly wound silence of the night, that sound, faint and broken, was the only thing that reached through the darkness inside him, and held on. The sound wasn't loud. So faint, in fact, that Noah thought he might have imagined it. But then it came again, this time laced with broken breaths, like something trying to call out for whatever might still remain in the world. A soft whimper. Wet. Torn apart by the wind. Noah shot to his feet. His hand instinctively pulled his collar up as his eyes turned toward the back of the warehouse, toward the place where the streetlights didn't reach. There, the darkness thickened. No light, no movement. Only the wind brushing against rusted tin and that persistent whimper slicing into the silence like the last breath of a fading voice. He moved slowly toward it, his boots crunching on the dry gravel with brittle cracks. Every step made his heart pound harder, as if his body were trying to warn him, telling him to turn back. But like every other night, that feeling was the only thing keeping him alive. That feeling that something, anything, had not yet ended. The dim glow from his phone flickered as he pulled it out and aimed it forward. Old wooden planks, a couple of rotting crates, a leaning wire fence, nothing unusual. Until the light landed on something else. A shape, hunched low, pressed tightly against a rust-streaked steel post. Noah held his breath. It was a dog. No, what remained of one. A trembling silhouette of what had once been a dog, now just skin and bones beneath a coat matted with dirt and dried blood. The outlines of its ribs jutted like a map of starvation carved into fur and flesh. Its eyes were sunken deep, but in their darkness flickered a glint of something caught between life and oblivion. The dog tried to lift its head as the light found it, then let it fall again, as if strength no longer belonged to its body. Noah didn't know when his breath finally left him. Something inside his chest had torn open, and not just from pity. It was the way the dog looked at him. Not pleading, not defiant, but as if it had once known what a human was, and had survived the worst of them. A thin chain circled its neck, anchored to the rusted post. On the ground, deep scratches scarred the concrete, proof that it had tried to break free, tried to live, and failed. Noah's chest tightened. In some blurred, aching moment, he saw that gaze merge with another memory, the look in his daughter's eyes before they closed, her small fingers clutching his shirt for the last time. A cold wind swept across his shoulder. And then he stepped forward. Noah knelt down slowly, his knees pressing into the cold, unyielding ground. He didn't reach out right away. Instead, he tilted the light from his phone so that it cast a soft beam along the dirt. Just enough to see, not enough to startle. The dog lay curled in on itself like a bundle of shadow. Its once thick, once sleek coat was now matted with mud, trash, and patches of raw, inflamed skin. With every gust of wind, the body flinched, not from cold, but from memory. Noah's gaze moved slowly. All 4 legs were caked in grime. The nails were worn, cracked, some split to the quick. The left eye appeared useless, clouded with a milky veil. But it was the scars, those overlapping, tangled lines across the body, that made his breath catch. On the shoulder, along the ribs, down the spine, ragged marks in chaotic patterns. Some were healed, some still seeping dry blood. There were round, symmetrical burns along the flank, so precise they couldn't have been accidental. A body once trained, or broken. Noah swallowed hard. The dog flinched as he shifted slightly closer. But it didn't growl. It didn't snap. It only breathed, sharp, shallow breaths, like it had learned to live through breath alone in long, endless dark. "Hey there. It's okay now," Noah whispered, unsure whether he was speaking to the dog or to himself. With all the patience he could gather, he extended his right hand, palm up, holding it just inches from the dog's head. The movement was deliberate, slow, unthreatening. The dog turned its good eye toward him, glassy, exhausted, rimmed with pain. And then, gently, it let out a quiet exhale. Noah understood. He reached for the chain, a thin, cold thing, and with one twist of the wrist, it snapped free from the rusted post. The metal clinked to the ground, and the dog's body recoiled. Not from pain, but from memory, as if that sound once came before something worse. Without thinking, Noah slipped off his jacket and laid it open on the dirt. The night air gripped his skin, sharp and immediate, but he didn't flinch. He bent forward, sliding his arms beneath the dog's wasted frame. It whimpered, barely a sound, more breath than cry, but did not resist. Noah lifted him carefully. The weight was startling. Too light for a body of that size, as if only bones and wounds remained. The head dropped against Noah's shoulder. One ear fluttered in the wind. A thin, fragile warmth touched his neck, as though the dog had stopped fighting. Not because he trusted, but because he was too tired to be afraid. Noah held him a little closer. A tremor ran down his spine. Cold, yes, but mostly because his heart was racing too fast. "It's okay now, kid. There's nothing left but ashes, but we're still here," he whispered. On the empty road leading into the old neighborhood, Noah walked slowly, arms wrapped tightly around the coat that cradled the fragile being he carried. The first winter wind howled through the crumbling brick corners, sweeping across rusted rooftops and bare trees. But beneath that worn fabric, he could feel it. The faint rise and fall of breath, like embers still holding on to a flicker of fire. Noah didn't speak. He didn't need to. Each step on the dew-slick sidewalk was a silent promise, a vow he wasn't sure he was strong enough to keep. At the door of his apartment, he nudged it open with his shoulder. Inside, a dim lamp glowed amber over a weathered sofa. Wooden floorboards lay quiet beneath, and the scent of old paper mixed with stale coffee. It wasn't a home anyone waited in. But tonight, someone had been brought in. He laid the dog down gently on the soft rug by the heater, tucking the coat around him the same way a father once tucked his daughter in before bedtime. The dog didn't cry, didn't stir. He just lay there, breath slowly evening out, his chest rising and falling like soft waves. In that moment, Noah sank to the floor, elbows on his knees, head in his hands, as if the weight of the world had finally found its time to collapse on his shoulders. Silence. Then he lifted his head and looked at the creature lying still in the middle of the room that had felt far too large for one man alone. A name came to him. No clear reason why. Maybe because of the ashen fur caked with dust and mud. Maybe the clouded eyes that still searched through shadows. Or maybe it simply reminded him of something that once faded, but never truly died. Ash, he whispered. The name moved through the air like a breath, not a command, not waiting for a response, just a greeting. The dog didn't react, but its dirty tail brushed lightly against the rug, a slow, almost unconscious wag. But it was real. Noah smiled for the first time in months, a tired, cracked smile, worn down by wind, but honest. "Welcome home, Ash," he murmured. Outside the window, snow began to fall, tiny flakes, soft and slow, almost too light to reach the ground. And in that cold room, the ashes had found a name. The door closed behind Noah with a sound long and drawn out, the kind of sound he never paid attention to when living alone. But tonight, it echoed differently. Ash was still in his arms. The apartment was no more than 60 square meters, tucked on the third floor of an aging complex where paint peeled off the lower walls, and the hallway light flickered as if it too was fighting through the winter. There was nothing waiting inside but the faint warmth from a heater in the corner. The usual scent of damp paper, rotting wood, and old coffee filled the air, a mix Noah had stopped noticing long ago, but now it struck him as strangely clear. Ash remained still, wrapped snugly in the coat, his head resting against Noah's chest, as if it were the only place left in the world worth trusting. Noah bent down, slowly, and placed him on the rug beside the heater. The same old rug, frayed at the edges, where Lily, his daughter, used to sit building castles out of Lego while nursery songs played softly from the radio. Now it belonged to another quiet soul, one who spoke no words either. He stood, hesitating. On the table sat a small lamp with a switch that clicked loudly when turned on. But Noah didn't touch it. He feared the sound might startle Ash. Instead, he unlocked his phone and set it face up on the table, letting the soft glow spill across the room. Just enough light to see each other. Not enough to hurt. The apartment, already small, now felt smaller still. Not because there was another body inside, but because, for the first time in months, something else was breathing beside him. Ash didn't move, but Noah could see the slow rhythm of his chest. Beneath the dark, matted fur, His ribs rose beneath the skin like lines drawn in ink. Noah exhaled, long and slow, leaning against the back of the sofa without sitting. He didn't know how long he would keep Ash. Didn't know what tomorrow would look like. But at least, for this cold night, they were no longer alone. Noah moved quietly toward the kitchen, where he kept an old plastic bowl and a few leftover packets of food, remnants from the last time he'd fed a stray cat by chance. He poured warm water into the bowl, then opened a drawer to find a spoon to stir it through. The drawer slid open with a soft metallic clink. Just one sound. Barely more than a whisper. But it made Ash flinch violently. The fragile little dog recoiled as if jolted by a wire of panic. His body folded in on itself, forelegs locked to the rug, ears pinned back, head ducked so low between his shoulders he seemed to be trying to disappear. No bark, no growl, not even a whimper. Noah froze, spoon still in hand, suspended in midair. He turned to look at Ash, lying just a few meters away. Yet the dog didn't look back. Not out of mistrust or defiance, but as if making eye contact was a risk once punished. More than that, it was as though Ash didn't dare to look. Noah set the spoon down with careful gentleness, as if afraid to fracture the delicate stillness that had only just begun to form. He drew a breath and returned to sit by the edge of the sofa, keeping a respectful distance. He didn't approach. He didn't call. Ash didn't growl, didn't lunge, didn't cry. He just sank deeper into a silence that felt like surrender. "How long has it been like this for you?" Noah asked softly, not expecting an answer. His voice cracked on the way out, rough and raw. To many, Ash might have looked like just a dog with overreactive instincts. But Noah, someone who had once flinched at sirens, who had lost nights of sleep over a slammed door, recognized it instantly for what it was. This was a panic attack, the kind buried so deep it rewired how the body responded to the world. Ash wasn't afraid of the spoon. He was reliving something. In his mind, every metallic clang was a command. Every sudden movement could precede pain. Noah didn't know how many times Ash had been made to respond correctly, just to avoid being punished. He only knew this. Ash no longer resisted, because he had grown used to not having a choice. Noah sat still, eyes on the small creature folding into itself, like a soul lost in the shape of a body. And for the first time since bringing Ash home, he realized this wasn't about saving a dog. He was sitting beside a soul that had forgotten the way back. Noah sat on the cold wooden floor, his back resting against the sofa, eyes still fixed on Ash, not like someone watching an animal, but like a man staring into a part of himself he'd forgotten. The faint light from his phone in the corner of the table was just enough to reveal every small movement. The way the dog trembled slightly at distant sounds beyond the door. The constant twitch of his ears. Lifting, folding, lifting again. Reflex layered on reflex, as if Ash had never been given permission to let his guard down. Noah knew that feeling. No one had ever really explained what PTSD would feel like after losing everything. No one told him there would be nights when he'd wake from broken dreams, unable to tell the difference between the present and the last time he held his daughter. No one said that washing a glass or hearing a soft clink could send his heart into a spiral, his palms slick with cold sweat like he'd just survived an earthquake. The body remembers pain before the mind has time to speak. And fear, it has a rhythm, a shape, a routine. Ash had it too. No words were needed, no explanations. The dog told his story through the way he avoided eye contact, the way he pulled deeper into the shadows, refusing sleep even as exhaustion closed his eyes. Just like Noah, just like the way he used to sit, crouched behind the kitchen counter, lights off, frozen in place, because he'd heard a child laughing on the neighbor's television. No one had trained them to react that way. But pain has its own logic, its own system of survival. It teaches both man and dog to forget what normal ever looked like. Noah reached forward and pulled a thin blanket from the sofa, draping it quietly over his legs. Every movement was slow, intentional, barely making a sound. Not because he feared startling Ash, but because he understood what it felt like when the whole world turned into a minefield, and your body became the trigger. Silence settled between them, a silence that didn't need filling. One had lost everything. The other had been used until there was nothing left. No words were spoken, but somewhere in the space between staggered breaths and dim light, a quiet thread of understanding began to reweave itself. Between two fractured souls, one human, one hound, something unnamed had started to heal. The wall clock gave 3 gentle clicks, 3 in the morning. The small apartment remained still, bathed in the faint glow from the phone resting on the table, battery at 12%, but Noah didn't plug it in. He didn't want the sudden brightness to startle Ash. Every sound-making device had been turned off. No music, no television, not even the low hum of the space heater that usually murmured in the corner. Only breath. Scattered. Shallow. Slow. But real. Ash lay curled on the rug, still cloaked in the coat. He didn't move. Yet his ears twitched faintly every time Noah stirred, even just a little. His posture was that of a creature who still didn't believe in safety, but had paused his fear just long enough to rest. Noah watched him for a long while. He couldn't remember the last time he'd let anyone sleep nearby, not because he feared being hurt again, but because he feared waking someone with the sharp edges of himself. He didn't reach out. He didn't try to close the distance. Instead, he pulled the blanket from the sofa, folded it in half, and lay down on the wooden floor, on his side, leaving exactly the space of one person between them. A distance just wide enough not to intrude, but not turned away. He looked at Ash one last time before closing his eyes. His heart still raced, not out of panic, but from something unfamiliar, unsettling even. The foreign feeling of allowing someone, wordless and still, to exist alongside his breathing. The room seemed to shrink, to warm, not from electricity, not from heat, but from the quiet presence of another living being. From warmth that didn't come from machines, but from silence that wasn't alone. A faint rustle came from across the space. Noah opened his eyes. Ash was still there, but his position had shifted. He no longer faced away. His head had turned slightly in Noah's direction. Legs tucked close, body rounded, not rigid, just curled like a small pile of ash, still holding on to a trace of warmth. No one spoke. No gesture was made. And yet, for the first time in a very long time, they both slept. No dreams, no nightmares, just sleep. And in the untouched space between them, a quiet rhythm of breath rose from both sides, separate but in sync. Dawn in Seattle didn't arrive with light. It crept in quietly, pale gray bleeding through the thin curtains, settling evenly over the cold wooden floor and the worn rug in the center of the room. Noah opened his eyes before the alarm could go off. Not that he set one anymore. In recent months, sleep had rarely lasted long enough to need one. But this morning, the first thing he did wasn't reach for his phone. He looked across the rug. Ash was still there. Still curled up in the same spot, but no longer tense. Breathing steady, ears twitching softly at the distant hum of passing cars. Still alert, but no longer retreating. Noah sat up. His joints creaked from the night spent on the hardwood floor, but he didn't complain. The simple knowledge that someone else was waking up in the space that had known only silence made everything feel lighter. He walked to the kitchen and switched on the kettle. This time he opened the cupboard more carefully, set the spoon down on the counter rather than letting it fall. Every movement was slow, soft, deliberate, as if each action had to be translated into a different language, a language without fear. Warm water was poured into the old plastic bowl. He opened a pouch of soft food, formulated for undernourished dogs, and squeezed it gently, bit by bit. No strong smells, no sharp textures. Noah stirred it slowly with a wooden spoon. Then he placed the bowl on the floor, about a meter away from Ash. He didn't make eye contact, didn't call out, just set it down, and stepped back. After that, he poured himself a cup of coffee. Not strong, not sweet, just something to hold, the heat against his skin, a small, steady rhythm of life. For the rest of the morning, Noah moved through the room in slow, deliberate arcs. He read half a page of a book, then glanced over at Ash, wiped down the countertop, restacked the papers on the desk, mopped the floor, folded the blanket. No words were exchanged, but Ash tracked it all with the corner of his eye, like a weary sentry too tired to rest. When Noah left his line of sight, Ash's ears perked. When Noah returned, they lowered again. Not trust, but acknowledgement. No one would call it training. It wasn't caregiving either. Noah called it inviting life to return, one quiet breath at a time. That afternoon, Seattle sank beneath a veil of thin clouds. The light grew weary, diffused and pale, casting cold gray-blue shadows across the apartment walls. The air was still, so still, one could hear the second hand of the clock tapping out time, step by quiet step. Noah sat on the floor beside the rug. His hand rested on his knee, right palm turned upward, fingers relaxed and open. He didn't beckon, didn't move. Ash lay at the edge of the rug, his head resting on his front paws, eyes half closed, but Noah knew he wasn't asleep. The tension in his shoulders lingered, the slight twitch of his ears responding to every sound in the hallway. His posture was that of a creature who had learned to survive by trusting nothing. Time passed in silence. Then, Ash opened his eyes. He didn't turn his head, just a sideways glance, from far away, through the haze of exhaustion in that dull, glassy gaze. It didn't land on Noah, but it landed near. Noah didn't move. His eyes dropped to his hand, the palm still open, trembling faintly from the cold. But he didn't pull it back. A long moment later, Ash let out a breath, a sound so soft it barely stirred the air. He lifted his head. Not high, not fast, just enough. Then lowered it again, this time a little closer. Noah exhaled carefully, holding his chest steady. That small gesture, from a being conditioned by violence, might have cost the energy of a leap. Ash crept forward in a motion so smooth it made no sound against the rug. His nose stopped just a few inches from Noah's hand. Then, contact. Not forceful, not lingering, just the soft, cold touch of a damp nose against the tip of Noah's middle finger. And then Ash pulled back again, turning his head to the side as if even he couldn't believe what he had just done. Noah didn't breathe. And then, without warning, Ash turned back. Not with his nose this time, with his whole head. He shifted his body forward, just slightly, and rested his chin in the open palm, still waiting for him. He wasn't asking for anything. He wasn't testing anything. He was simply offering. Noah didn't cry, but something in his chest folded inwards, aching. His hand closed, not to grip, not to claim. Just curled gently, as one might cup smoke, knowing that too much force would make it disappear. Two beings, two scars. Neither one asked for trust. But in that moment, what happened was no longer survival. It was a choice. Ash still rested his head on Noah's hand. The weight was barely there, yet the warmth from his chin seeped into Noah's skin, real, soft, and more alive than anything he had felt in months. And that was when the memory returned. Not in words, not in sharp, vivid images, but in sensation. A familiar shape, a small hand, once nestled in his palm long ago. The hospital that winter night had been just as cold as the apartment was now. But the chill hadn't come from the air or the brick walls. It had come from silence, from the long, empty corridors void of footsteps, from the heart monitor blinking evenly despite having lost its rhythm, from the way the nurse couldn't meet his eyes. Noah remembered sitting there, next to the bed where his daughter lay, as if fused to the cold metal chair beneath him. Lily, 7 years old, breathing through a machine. Eyes closed, lips dry, her dark brown hair tangled across a white pillow. She couldn't speak, but she still knew he was there. Noah had known, because even in that hazy fog of unconsciousness, her small hand had reached for his, the same way she always had on those sleepy mornings when he walked her to preschool. And then it lay there in his grasp, as if holding it tightly enough, long enough, could somehow keep her from leaving. He had sat through the night like that, not speaking, not crying, just holding on, until the hand stopped holding back, until there was only weight and no longer life. And from that moment on, he hadn't let anyone touch his hands again. Until today. Ash wasn't Lily, but the way the dog shifted his chin across Noah's palm, quietly, without asking, summoned that same feeling, a fragile creature, a faint warmth, a moment that would not last, but was real. Noah stayed still, not from suppression, but from a fear that moving might break the memory apart. Because for the first time in a long while, someone, without words, had chosen to place their trust in him. Ash remained still, his head resting gently on Noah's hand. He didn't move, didn't stir, just existed there in silence, as if, at last, he had found a place where he didn't need to stand guard. Noah looked down at his face. The fur around Ash's eyes was stiff with dried dirt and dust. A thin, old tear marked the edge of one ear, and the left side of his chest rose and fell faintly, as if he were breathing with all the caution he had left. A dog who, by all odds, shouldn't still be here. A soul that might have vanished, if not for a single cry that night, thin as wind, drifting lost in the dark. Noah lifted his other hand slowly and placed it gently between Ash's eyes, on a patch of fur untouched by wounds. Ash flinched slightly, but he didn't pull away. He opened his eyes and looked. It wasn't the sharp, survival-driven stare Noah had come to expect from animals that had been beaten and broken. It wasn't desperate or fearful. It was simply present, not searching, not asking, just seeing him. And in that moment, something stirred in Noah. Not loud, not overwhelming, just a quiet emotion, deeply human, that he had thought he'd buried forever in that cold hospital room long ago. He lowered his head and whispered, not certain if he was speaking to Ash, to himself, or to whatever might still be listening out there. "Thank you for still wanting to live." The words dropped softly onto the rug like the first warmth in a winter far too long. Ash didn't move, but one ear twitched. Then his eyes closed again. Noah stayed there, hand still open, eyes shining faintly, wrapped in a silence that, for the first time in months, did not echo with loss. It carried only the quiet breath of something beginning to return. Noah sat in front of the computer screen, a cup of cold coffee resting beside his left hand. Ash lay a few steps away on the familiar rug, head resting loosely on his front paws, eyes closed. Not in deep sleep, but no longer on guard either. Outside, Seattle remained cloaked in fog. The distant hum of traffic played like a background score for a day that held no events, and didn't need any. Noah opened a blank document. The cursor blinked against the white page. He hadn't planned to write anything important. He just wanted to put it down. Not for anyone else, not for an audience, just to affirm that the past few days had been real, that a small creature had rested in his hands, hadn't run, had breathed beside him through a long, cold night. The first lines appeared on the screen. I named the dog Ash. Not because of his coat, but because of the feeling of ash. Something that seemed extinguished, but sometimes still holds warmth if someone's patient enough to reach in. He didn't write carefully. No structure, no polish. Just moments. The night he found Ash behind the warehouse. The glance that never met his eyes, but still revealed fear. The first time Ash ate a piece of chicken, not fast, not trembling. The strange stillness of two broken souls sharing an apartment where lights stayed off because even a single click could make them both flinch. He didn't hide anything, didn't add anything. And at the end, he typed, I don't know if I'm doing this right. I just know that sometimes you don't have to save the whole world. Sometimes it's enough not to turn away from one creature trying to stay alive. He hit post. No wide sharing. Just tucked it into his personal blog, the place he used to scatter half-thoughts meant only for himself. A few hours later, the post began to circulate. Not viral, not loud, just one person sending it to another. A quiet comment. A single crying emoji. A share captioned with, Read this if you ever believed life begins with kindness. Noah didn't think much of it, until the next morning, when he opened his phone and saw hundreds of notifications, views, messages, comments, emails. Among them, some words made the hairs on his neck rise. VX03, still alive? Judging by the fur, probably a batch D. Any tag number? This dog looks familiar. Used to show up in the group. Noah froze. No one said anything specific. No details. No clear claims. Just the way they wrote, as if Ash wasn't a living being, but a unit, a product. A part of some system Noah had never even known existed. Noah sat in front of the computer screen, the pale glow reflecting off his glasses, casting a stark light across a face slowly tightening with tension. The cursor blinked on the blog interface. Below it, a steady stream of newly approved comments. Most were heartfelt. I cried when Ash rested his head on your hand. Thank you for not looking away. This reminded me of my Rufus years ago. But not all of them. Amid the warmth and sincerity, a few comments felt different. Not long, not clear, but cold. VX03, still alive? Batch D, you can tell from the back and right ear. Check under the collar with a UV light. There should be a code. Recognize this one from a clip last year. The eyes, I remember them. Noah frowned. VX03? He typed the term into the search bar. Nothing clear at first. But when paired with Canine Batch D, some strange results began to surface. Old forums, archived threads, half-deleted discussions, vague titles, fragmented content. Combat use dogs, Batch D, fast response, high volatility. Third phase shutdown issued after leak at Camp G. Most units recalled. VX03 exception? Noah's grip on the mouse tightened. A slow thrum of questions started to hum in the back of his mind, still without shape. Ash. Wasn't just a stray? He scrolled back through the comments. Some anonymous users had left just one line, then vanished. Accounts recently made, no profile pictures. It didn't feel like conversation. It felt like confirmation. Noah reopened the original post, read it from the top. The words he had written, soft with gratitude, gentle with memory, now felt like they were being dissected in another language entirely. A language of command strings, batch labels, technical references devoid of feeling. He turned to look toward Ash. The dog was still lying there. Asleep, maybe. Or pretending. The desk light stretched across only one side of his body, just enough to catch a patch of thinning fur where the skin beneath almost revealed the edge of something. A line. A shape, as if something had once been embedded there. Noah froze. He wasn't sure what he had seen, but his heart began to beat out of rhythm. For the first time since pulling Ash from behind that warehouse, a thought crept into his mind, quiet, chilling, and deeply unsettling. What if he wasn't born to be a dog, but built to be something else? The next morning, after finishing half a bowl of chicken porridge, Ash returned to his usual spot, beside the window fogged with condensation. The apartment seemed warmer, not because of the heater, but because of a routine quietly taking root. Noah prepared the food, Ash ate slowly, then silently settled beside the glass. Noah rinsed the bowl, dried his hands, then walked over. He knelt slowly. His hand reached out to the fur along Ash's back, where patches of mud still clung, despite being wiped down on that first night. Ash didn't turn, didn't pull away like before. One ear twitched slightly, but that was all, almost as if he had grown used to the presence. "Let me take a look, okay?" Noah whispered, as if speaking to a child afraid of pain. Carefully, he parted the clumped fur, using a warm cloth to dab and soften what remained. The mud loosened, revealing the darkened skin beneath, ashen, dry. Then he saw it. A small circle, bare, hairless, between two ribs. The scar had a perfectly rounded edge, as if branded by a hot metal tool. The center was slightly sunken, the surrounding skin darker, uneven in color. The burn had healed, but it left no room for misinterpretation. This wasn't from an insect, not a fall, and certainly not an accident. Noah froze. Before he could react, he saw another just beneath it, then a third. 3 scars, equally spaced, running down the side of Ash's body in a straight line, like they had been placed in sequence. His hand began to tremble. Noah leaned closer, scanning the entire flank and shoulder. Beneath the dark fur, more scars like the others revealed themselves. Maybe 6. Possibly more, if he counted the faint outlines along the upper back. This wasn't random. It couldn't be coincidence. A single burn could be an accident. But a series, shaped, aligned, repeated, was something else entirely. A language. He put the cloth down. His breath caught in his throat. His hand lingered near Ash's shoulder, and for the first time, Noah felt afraid to keep touching. Not because Ash would react, but because he feared discovering something his heart wasn't ready to understand. Ash turned his head, slowly, not startled, not retreating, just watching. His eyes, dark, quiet, and deep as night, held no surprise, as if he knew, as if he had always known this moment would come. And instead of hiding, he simply remained there, letting Noah see. No growl, no bark, no resistance, as if to say, "I can't tell you, but if you're brave enough to look, then I won't hide anymore." That afternoon, Seattle remained draped in a dull, steady drizzle. Noah's apartment rested in the pale light filtering through the thick clouds, casting gray streaks across the walls like smudges of chalk. He had just picked up a small package left at the door, a new collar, soft material, simple design, printed with a name and number, Ash, 206-365-6566. It was a small step, something Noah thought of as a quiet way of saying Ash had a place to return to if he ever got lost. He opened a drawer to find an old keyring, a small metal clasp that would hold the collar tag. Just a detail, a harmless action. But when he picked it up, the ring and the cluster of keys clinked softly together, a faint clink that belonged in any ordinary home. Ash didn't react like an ordinary dog. He jolted violently, as if shocked by a live wire. His claws scrambled against the floor, body twisting sharply. In a split second, he flattened himself against the wall, eyes wide, ears pinned back, jaw trembling open as if preparing to snarl. But no sound came out. His entire body shook, as if that sound, the tiny chime of metal, had opened a door inside his mind, a place without light, filled only with orders and punishment. Noah froze. The keyring slipped from his hand and hit the floor. "Ash," he called gently, voice low and calm, but laced with fear. There was no response, no eye contact. Ash's gaze wasn't in the room anymore. Noah had seen that look once before, on the face of a young soldier in the rehab ward, the one who had ripped out his IV line at the faint sound of helicopters overhead. That look wasn't fear. It was the face of someone who had been pulled back into the battlefield, even while standing in a safe room. Noah didn't approach, didn't touch, didn't speak again. He sat down, facing Ash, keeping his distance. Then he slid the keyring gently across the floor, letting it rest where it made no more sound. He lifted both hands, palms open, showing he held nothing, as if surrendering to the moment itself. It took a long time before Ash's body began to unclench. His breathing returned, shallow and fast, but real. Minutes passed. Neither moved. Only the soft tapping of rain against the window and the faint hum of the heater filled the silence. Finally, Ash turned his head. Not fully, but just enough for Noah to know he had come back. Noah whispered, almost like an apology. "That was just a keyring, Ash. But for you, maybe it was something else." He bent down, picked it up without a sound, wrapped it gently in cloth, tucked it inside the drawer, and closed it by hand, ensuring no metal touched metal again. And for the rest of the evening, in that quiet apartment, neither of them touched anything that could make a metallic sound. Not out of fear of triggering Ash, but because Noah understood. Some sounds, though meaningless to others, can become commands carved in pain, and for a soul trained by trauma, they can kill whatever safety has been rebuilt. Noah couldn't remember when he had agreed to meet her. The message came in the middle of the night. Just a single line. "You named him Ash?" No signature, no introduction, no context. Just a question, but it carried the weight of someone who had known Ash, known him before Noah had ever entered the story. Below the message was a photo, blurry, unclear, but unmistakably Ash. He looked stronger, standing straighter, eyes sharp, shoulders strapped with a harness. The photo was angled from the side, taken on what looked like an outdoor training field. On his front left leg, a streak of orange paint, a mark of some kind. Noah felt the chill run down his spine, vertebra by vertebra. The next morning, Clarissa Wren arrived. She stood at his apartment door before he had even switched on the hallway light. A tall woman, her brown hair tied back neatly, her face bare of makeup. Her gray eyes held the same stillness as Seattle's skies, watchful, alert, needing no introduction. She wore a long coat, leather gloves, and carried a small cloth bag so worn the seams had begun to fray. "Clarissa Wren?" Noah asked, voice low and rough. She nodded. No handshake, no smile. The first thing Noah felt about this woman wasn't threat. It was the quiet gravity of someone who had been inside the storm, someone who had survived it, and who had now returned not to warn, but to speak the things others refused to hear. Ash wasn't in the living room when she stepped inside. Noah had left him in the bedroom, the door left ajar. Not because he feared how Ash would react, but because something told him this meeting shouldn't begin with panic. Clarissa paused briefly in front of the bookshelf. Her eyes skimmed the scattered notebooks and an unfinished novel. She didn't judge. She just observed. "You knew Ash?" Noah asked directly, skipping formality. Clarissa turned to him. Her gaze never flickered. Her voice came low and even. "His name isn't Ash. His designation is VX-03, and I was the one who signed off on his initial training protocols." For a moment, the air in the room went still. Noah didn't react. Couldn't. He just stood there, unsure of which part shook him more. The fact that she knew the code name, or that she said signed off with a hollow neutrality. As if it had been a routine, not a decision that had cost a living creature its sense of safety, its future, maybe even its soul. Clarissa didn't sit. She stood by the window, eyes turned outward, though her mind was clearly elsewhere, somewhere light never reached, where every sound echoed like a sharp bark slicing through steel. "You thought he was a rescue dog?" she asked, without turning. Noah didn't answer, because he hadn't thought anything at all. He was just trying to live each day beside Ash, as if with a creature learning how to breathe again. "He wasn't," Clarissa said. Her voice was dry, papery. "VX-03 was part of the first generation of reflex control units. We didn't train with rewards. We established command through pain and repetition." From her cloth bag, she pulled out a thin folder and laid it on the table. Gray cover. No logo. No label. Just an embossed number. D09. The training facility had no name. We called it Sector D. It was buried deep in an old mineral extraction zone in the northern part of the state. At its peak, it housed nearly 200 subjects, mostly shepherds, Malinois, Dobermans. Noah opened the folder. Inside were blurred photographs, handwritten notes, a grid map marked with factory-style sector codes. Red ink slashed through portions of the pages. Transfer orders, destruction notices, designations for non-compliant units. VX-03 was selected early, Clarissa continued. Not because he excelled, but because he adapted. He didn't lose his reflexes under punishment. He stayed focused even while starving. She spoke without a waver in her voice. But there was something else in her eyes. Something Noah couldn't name. It wasn't numbness. More like a long fractured place that had never been allowed to break. "What did you do there?" Noah asked. She was silent for a few seconds before replying. "I managed reflex response behavior. My job was to calculate how many trauma cycles each subject could endure before breaking. Once we had the data, we eliminated the ones no longer useful." Noah looked at her like one might look at a wall once stained in blood, now painted over in institutional gray. "And Ash?" he asked quietly. Clarissa slowly rested her hand on the file. VX-03 was never marked for destruction. He disappeared during a data breach and internal purge. Someone opened the cages on the final night. Only one subject didn't come back. The room fell still. Noah turned toward the half-closed bedroom door, where Ash still lay. His heart beat slowly, heavily, as if everything he had just heard didn't just unearth a dog's past, but tore through the very idea of what he used to believe survival meant. Noah sat frozen, eyes locked on the cover of the file. D09. The number didn't mean anything specific, yet it felt etched across his forehead, as though he'd accidentally stepped into a place no one was ever meant to see. Clarissa stood still, her hands lightly clasped in front of her, like someone accustomed to waiting for judgment. But when she spoke again, her voice remained steady, stripped of highs or lows. As if the years spent inside the system had drained her of reaction entirely. After the purge, all units labeled no longer controllable were terminated. Sector D was shut down. Some records were encrypted. Some simply disappeared. She pulled a wrinkled sheet of paper from her coat pocket and laid it flat on the table. A list. Not long. 10 code numbers, VX-01 through VX-010, each followed by a brief annotation. VX-01, transferred VX-02, unstable response, terminated VX-03, unconfirmed VX-04, died during test 2, VX-05, conditional release, data reactive. And VX-03, Ash, is the only one without a recorded termination or retraining status, Clarissa said, pointing to the line. Unconfirmed. Noah felt his heartbeat stutter. How did he get out? He asked, barely above a whisper. Clarissa shook her head. No one knows. The kennel cameras glitched that night. The lock systems were disabled from inside. Kennel 7, the one assigned to VX-03, was the only door left open. Noah glanced toward the bedroom. Ash still hadn't come out. Maybe he was sleeping. Or maybe, like always, he was simply listening, quietly absorbing everything without interrupting. And after that? Noah asked. From the folder, Clarissa pulled a water-damaged photo, grainy, printed from a street surveillance feed. It showed a lone Malinois crossing a highway, thin and soaked, limping on his hind leg. The image was blurred, but the eyes, unmistakably, Ash. That was 2 days after the breach. He walked nearly 10 miles, through dense forest, in freezing temperatures. No handler, no commands, no sense of direction. But he kept going. Her voice softened. For the first time since their conversation began, Noah heard something shift. Not fatigue, but something heavier. Something she had carried too long to put into words. VX-03 wasn't a perfect product, but he was the one who remained. And in a system designed to control, being the one who remains is a flaw, and flaws, to them, must be erased. Noah looked at her, and he no longer saw the cold technician, no longer the one who signed the training orders. He saw someone who had come carrying the ashes of a system, not to hand them over, but to find someone brave enough to open the file, and not look away. Clarissa said nothing more. She lowered her head slightly, and reached into the worn crossbody bag slung at her hip. Every motion was slow, precise, free of unnecessary sound. From within the thick fabric, she retrieved a small object wrapped in gray linen. Noah watched, his back against the chair, but his shoulders tense. Clarissa unwrapped the layers with the kind of care reserved for something sacred, or dangerous, or both. Inside the bundle was a matte black external hard drive. No brand, no markings, just a faint scratch in the shape of an X near the top edge, an unspoken symbol, meant only for those who already knew. She placed it on the table, between them. She didn't push it toward him, didn't explain. Just looked at him, with eyes that neither pleaded nor demanded. There's a backup of Sector D on this, she said. Training videos, transfer orders, audio files for conditioning sequences, and a list of real names behind the command codes. Noah's heartbeat slowed. Clarissa leaned back slightly, as if the weightiest thing in the room wasn't the drive, but the decision to bring it into the light. What are you planning to do with it? He asked. She didn't answer immediately. Her gaze shifted towards the bedroom door, still slightly ajar. I've kept it for 3 years, hidden. I thought disappearing would be enough. But when I read your post about Ash, I realized something. VX-03 isn't just the past. He's living proof. She paused. Her voice softened, but it carried something deeper. Regret, maybe. or resolve long overdue. If I give this to the press, they'll question it. If I turn it over to the authorities, it'll vanish inside the system. But if you, the person living beside him, release it, they'll have to look. Noah reached out and gently touched the hard drive. It was cold, not like something made to preserve memory, more like something that could collapse a system, if you found the right code to open it. "You don't have to decide now," Clarissa said, as if she could hear the tension in his breath. "Just remember, this isn't only about a dog." She stood, pulling her coat back on. She didn't wait to be thanked or shown out, didn't say goodbye. "Vex-03 was never meant to survive," she said as she opened the door. "The fact that he's still alive is something some people will never forgive." The door closed. The apartment fell back into silence. On the table, the hard drive remained, dense, black, like a sealed vault of memory and consequence. And from the bedroom, Ash stepped out. Slowly, he looked at Noah. Not with a question, not with reproach, just a gaze that seemed to ask, "Now that you know, will you still stay?" Noah didn't sleep that night. The hard drive remained on the table, silent like an undetonated bomb. His laptop screen stayed open, the cursor blinking in the search bar, as if waiting for a name. But Noah's fingers refused to type. He knew. Once he found the right person, there would be no going back. And that was exactly why he hesitated. It wasn't until Ash, curled quietly beneath the desk, shifted and let out a deep, slow breath, the kind that sounded like an acknowledgement of simply existing, that Noah finally opened the search tab. Elijah Rudd, independent investigative journalist, known for exposing the scandals inside a Western animal research facility, also known for being threatened, fired, blacklisted. But still writing. Elijah's blog had no sleek logo, no polished interface, just a plain white background, black text, and a bold header. Some stories are only told when no one is allowed to tell them. Noah clicked the contact section. No email, just an old-fashioned note. "Send hard copy or physical letter. I don't take links. If your story is real, it'll find a way." Noah opened a drawer, pulled out pen and paper. He didn't write everything. No names. No mention of Clarissa. Not even his own. He wrote, "I live with a creature that was never meant to survive. I have training backups, code sequences, and field logs. But more importantly, I have his eyes. If you want to understand why he still looks at people like he's waiting for someone to deliver a verdict, I'll show you." At the end, he added a phone number. No name. A fresh number, registered that morning, meant only for this. 3 days later, a single message arrived. "This is Elijah Rudd. Meet me at Fremont Bridge, 9 a.m. Come alone. And don't bring the dog." Noah stared at the message for several long minutes. Not out of fear, but because for the first time in months, someone else, someone outside of him, knew Ash existed, and didn't call him it. Elijah Rudd wasn't what Noah had imagined. He didn't bring a camera, no oversized bag full of documents, just a worn leather notebook, a pencil shaved down to the length of a pinky, and the eyes of someone who had seen far more than one needs to in order to sleep soundly. Their first meeting was brief. Elijah listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't ask questions too soon. But the way he took notes, with his own coded symbols, every mark deliberate, made it clear. This wasn't his first time chasing the remnants of something meant to stay buried. When Noah handed him the hard drive, Elijah didn't ask who had given it, didn't look surprised. He simply said, "I'll verify everything. But I need to meet him." The first assessment took place 2 days later. Ash was in the familiar living room, the old rug, a bowl of warm water by the window, and Noah, seated on the edge of the sofa, never letting Ash leave his sight. Elijah didn't touch him. didn't move too close. He just opened his laptop, slid on one side of his headset, and began playing a sequence of short audio clips, most of them metallic sounds, monotone beeps, and a whistle made up of 3 dissonant notes. To the average observer, Ash's response might have seemed minimal. But Noah, who had lived beside him, saw it instantly. A single click echoed from a clip extracted from the drive. Ash tilted his head slightly, not turning, but his ear twitched. Then came the 3-note whistle. Soft but piercing. Ash's breath quickened. He didn't growl, didn't whimper, but his body subtly lifted off the rug, the way one might prepare to spring. Elijah scribbled without pause. "What do you see?" Noah asked, voice taut. Elijah didn't answer right away. Only when the sequence ended did he look up. "He responds to each command code, doesn't need to see it, doesn't need confirmation. His body's learned to obey, before his mind has time to choose." Noah clenched his fists. "Can it be undone?" he asked. Elijah paused. His expression softened, not out of pity, but recognition. "We don't erase it. We retrain the body to understand. This time the sound doesn't come with pain." He closed the notebook. Shut the laptop. To heal, there's one condition that must come first. He has to believe, truly believe for the first time, that you won't command him. Noah nodded, eyes drifting to Ash, who now sat against the far wall, watching them both. Not afraid, not retreating, just watching, like he was waiting to see if this time would really be different. Night settled slowly over Seattle. The rain had stopped tapping at the windows, leaving behind only the chill clinging to the glass and the dim amber light reflecting the shapes of 2 beings, one man, one dog, sharing a small apartment and a rhythm no longer rushed. Noah was preparing warm water for a quiet evening. Ash lay on the rug as usual, his head resting on his front paws, eyes half closed, breathing steady. Since Elijah's visit, he hadn't reacted to the small sounds like before. The apartment had grown calm again, as if, between them, a language without words was being restored, one breath at a time. Until, clang! The sharp sound sliced through the room like a blade through air. Noah froze. The steel kettle lid had fallen, bounced across the tiled floor, spun once, then rolled gently to the base of the cupboard. A small sound, unintended. But its timing, its pitch, was too exact. He didn't need to turn to know what had happened. Ash had jumped to his feet, but he didn't bark, didn't lunge, didn't growl. He stood still, then stepped back. Step by step, like each retreat was a note being replayed in an old, haunting symphony. His back touched the wall. His hind legs slid slightly on the rug. His body tensed, eyes wide, not with immediate panic, but with the weight of memory stirred awake. Noah didn't move, didn't speak. He simply turned and saw what made his throat tighten. Ash hadn't retreated into the shadows. He had stepped back. But his eyes never left Noah's. He didn't snarl, didn't flinch, didn't shrink. He simply looked. And in that gaze was something Noah couldn't name. It wasn't fear, it wasn't trust, it was a question. "What will you do this time?" Noah took a single step forward, slowly. Ash didn't blink, ears alert, breath short and uneven. Noah knelt, level with his eyes. He didn't reach out, didn't call his name. He just whispered, "It was just the lid, Ash." Not a command, not a punishment, just an accident. And I'm here. For the first time in months, Noah felt himself tremble. Not from fear of Ash's reaction, but from the quiet, terrible fear that he might not have enough patience for a soul programmed by pain. Ash didn't come closer, but he didn't step back again. And in the space between their gaze, Noah understood. Ash was still there, even if memory had pulled him away once more. Ash still stood there, pressed into the shadowed space between the wall and the bookshelf, just beyond the reach of the warm desk lamp. His silhouette stretched across the rug, trembling slightly with the uneven rhythm of his breath. Noah remained on the floor, unmoving. The distance between them was less than 2 meters, but now it felt as wide as a chasm of memory, a space where every step forward risked stirring something neither of them was ready to face. Ash didn't growl, he didn't bolt, he didn't shrink into himself like he had in those first nights. He had backed away and then stopped. Leaning into the corner, not out of defense, but as if to draw a boundary he could manage, a line he could control, and still his eyes stayed fixed on Noah. Unblinking, unwavering. It wasn't the stare of panic. It was the gaze of a soul wondering, if I don't defend myself, will I be hurt? If I don't bark, don't fight, don't flinch, will they come closer? Or will they leave me behind? Noah swallowed hard. His body felt frozen, not from fear, but from a deeper, quieter realization. Ash was waiting, not reacting from reflex, not following a conditioned script, just watching, trying to relearn whether silence would be punished this time. Noah slowly lowered himself further, resting his weight on his elbows, never breaking the gaze. He said nothing. Instead, he opened his palm and gently laid it on the floor, facing upward. No movement forward, no pressure, an invitation, not a command. Then he bowed his head into his other arm, still watching Ash. Not as an appeal for pity, but as a quiet offering. Even humans can be empty, can be hurt, can wait without asking. Neither of them moved in the minutes that followed. Only 2 breaths, one fast, one slow, reaching for each other in a silence that carried no signal, no order. Then, a soft sound, barely audible. Ash's shoulders dropped. He didn't leave the corner. But he let out a breath, not forced, not stiff, not guarding. And in that darkness, his eyes stayed on Noah. Not alert, just present. The message came in at 2:13 a.m. Noah didn't wake because of a notification sound. His phone was always on silent at night. He woke because his body shivered, just slightly, involuntarily, as if some old instinct, carved during years of unease, had whispered that something was wrong. No alarm needed. He simply knew. The phone screen glowed dimly beside him. Sender. Anonymous. The message contained just one line, short, even, cold. VX03 still responds to signal 732? No name, no greeting, no typos, just a question. But it carried the weight of an old authority. Rebooting. Noah sat up straight. His heart pounded, not from fear, but from the sudden, sharp breath that came from the foot of the bed. Ash. He was sitting upright, not barking, but wide-eyed, ears pulled taut toward the door as if he'd already heard what Noah hadn't. A perfect reflex, no signal required. Noah placed a hand on Ash's back. Cold, ice cold. He turned back to his phone. Another message had come in, 10 seconds later. No one taught you to play with broken tools, Noah. This time, there was a name. Victor Sloan. A name Noah had seen in the files Clarissa gave him, lead trainer of the Reflex Control Program, responsible for the VX unit. His file had been marked in red. Known for off-protocol methods. Retaliatory behavior, highly probable. Noah didn't reply. He stood, locked the front door, and pulled the curtains shut. In his mind, fragments began stacking fast. Clarissa had been tracked. Elijah had begun publishing data. Ash had been located. And Victor hadn't sent a threat. He had sent a test, as if Noah wasn't the target, just the temporary handler of an asset now scheduled for retrieval. From the corner of the room, Ash stepped forward. He didn't touch Noah, but he placed himself between him and the door. No bark, no growl, just his body, still and square, and in its stance, one clear message. I remember him. The meeting wasn't planned. It just happened. Noah was leaving his usual cafe at the end of the street, one hand holding a warm pastry box, the other carrying groceries for dinner. Ash was home. Elijah had warned him, firmly, keep him out of public. Not yet. Not during this phase. The streets of Fremont were quiet. Fog still hung low, the way it always did on Seattle afternoons. But as Noah passed the parking lot near the abandoned rail station, a sound rang out. Click, click, whistle. 3 beats, precise, clean. No distortion. Noah stopped cold. The sound came from a small speaker mounted on the side of a dark SUV parked across the lot. The window didn't roll down, but he was there. The man in the leather coat, gloves on, leaned back like a stagehand orchestrating a show from behind the curtain. Victor Sloan. No introduction needed. No name tag. The way he pressed the button to play the sequence. The way his eyes cut through the tinted glass. It wasn't Noah he was looking at. It was what lived inside Ash's memory. Then another click. A second sequence played from the speaker. Conditioning tone. Pattern 732. Noah felt it before his brain could name it. Not with his ears, but through his body. Every nerve under his skin lit up, like the night in that apartment when Clarissa showed him the tapes was happening all over again. Only this time, it was real. It was live. The window of Noah's apartment was just one alley away from that lot. And at that very moment, he heard a crash from inside. He dropped everything, ran, took the stairs 3 at a time, threw the door open, and saw Ash trembling in the middle of the living room. He wasn't howling, wasn't barking, wasn't lunging at the door. He was just standing there, back legs buckling slightly, eyes fixed on the empty air, like he knew a command was coming. And from the speaker outside, the sound continued. Not loud, but enough to activate. A growl, low, raw, crawling out from Ash's throat. Not the kind that threatened, but the kind that cracked. Like the sound of something breaking apart, something torn between instinct and the present moment. Noah didn't speak, didn't reach for him. He just stepped beside him, placing himself between Ash and the echoing noise of a past that refused to die. Ash stood in the middle of the living room, as if the world were cracking beneath his paws. His body was taut, trembling slightly with every beat of the sound pouring in from the speaker outside. The cold, even sequence not meant to carry emotion, only to trigger obedience. The growl that leaked from his throat wasn't a threat. It was closer to a groan, clenched between his teeth, like someone trying not to signal danger, but unable to find safety either. Noah stood still. He didn't call out, didn't plead. He knew this wasn't the moment to do anything. This was a boundary, a place no human could cross. This was the line where Ash had to choose, to surrender to programming, or to trust something he'd never been allowed to believe in. And then, Ash shuddered. His eyes blinked once, ears lifted, then fell. One step back, a sharp turn of his head, quick, clean, like a scar being ripped backward through time, and then Ash ran, not toward the front door, not into the dark. He ran straight into the bedroom, Noah's room. Noah barely had time to turn as Ash's lean but solid frame swept past like wind. He made no sound, searched for nothing to tear or attack. He needed only one thing, a place that smelled like Noah. The bedroom door pushed open, unlocked. Ash slipped under the desk beside the bed, pressing his body tightly to the wall. His breathing came in rapid bursts, but his eyes stayed open, aware. Present. Noah stepped forward and stood in the doorway. He didn't say his name, didn't offer comfort. He simply stood there. Present. Ash lifted his head. Their eyes met. There were no commands left to wait for, no signals to respond to, only a gaze from a creature who had just run from the thing that once designed him, and chosen instead to return to what he had never dared to trust, the presence of a man who would not command him. Noah stood motionless at the threshold, not stepping inside. In the room, lit only by the soft glow of the bedside lamp filtering through thin curtains, he saw Ash curled beneath the desk. No whimpering, no violent trembling like those first nights. Just a creature who had withdrawn from the battlefield and chosen a place where no orders lived. Ash breathed, fast but not panicked. His eyes remained open, watching Noah. Noah said nothing. There were no words that could fit this moment, no comfort that would land exactly right, and certainly no command that could undo a fear born of programming. There was only one truth, clear now, as if it had been waiting all along to be named. Ash had faced two paths. One, follow the sound, the training, the reflex that once spared him punishment. Two, retreat, but not into a cage corner, not behind a sofa like before. He had run into this room, to the place that smelled of Noah's shirts. That held the slow, steady breath Ash had heard night after night. He had run toward the one person who had never given him a command. Noah stepped in farther and sat on the floor, not close, just far enough to lean back against the wall, eyes level with the space beneath the desk. He watched Ash for a long time. Then one sentence left his lips, not spoken to be answered, but as a quiet acknowledgement of what had just taken place. "You chose me instead of instinct." His voice cracked at the end. Something broke open in his chest, not tears, but a collapsing of the wall that had always divided two worlds. Man and dog, savior and saved, trainer and the one learning how to trust. Ash didn't move. But the way he held Noah's gaze, not in waiting, not in fear, but in quiet recognition, made it impossible for Noah to look away. He didn't need to speak. Because for the first time, the choice hadn't come from a leash. It hadn't come from a whistle. It had come from a heart, once programmed to belong to no one. And now, that same heart had written its very first line of code. All on its own. Noah's apartment was no longer a place to hide. It had become a meeting point, a quiet command center where three people sat around a dark wooden coffee table. No one made small talk. No one poured tea. Just the warm overhead light, three pairs of eyes, and a single hard drive placed in the center. Ash was asleep in the bedroom, the door left slightly ajar. But Noah knew. One strong gust, one unfamiliar sound, and he would be awake. Elijah Rudd had brought a stack of printed documents, many pages marked in red highlighter. Clarissa Wren, thinner than at their first meeting and more subdued, sat with a folder of codes, maps, and handwritten notes that had never been submitted. And Noah, no longer just the listener, sat at the center, his laptop open, eyes fixed on the first line glowing on the screen. Evidence and testimony from Sector D to the Shadow Handler Network. Elijah spoke. "We're going to release 3 layers of data. 1, behavioral files, imagery, and encoded logs. 2, Clarissa's signed statement. And 3, field footage showing reflex analysis with Ash as the surviving case study." Noah nodded. "We can't go halfway," he said. A quiet story disappears, but evidence with faces, with voices, with names, that makes them tremble. Clarissa laid down a black and white printout, a grainy still from an old surveillance camera. In the image was a wire cage, a Malinois being pulled backward by a collar, legs buckled, ears flattened. Beside the dog stood a man in a leather coat, his face cropped out of the frame. Beneath the image was a note, handwritten and trembling. VX-03, signal test 7-3-2, live, response rate 96%. Clarissa whispered. That was the only time I stood outside the fence. I couldn't take it anymore. Elijah didn't look at her. He just said, evenly, "You're not outside. You're here." The air thickened, like smoke from a cigarette that hadn't been lit. Noah looked up. "Then the question is, where do we start?" Elijah gave the faintest smile, not from hope, but from the quiet truth that some things can't stay buried. "We start with VX-03. With him. Because if a creature that was once completely broken can still learn how to trust again, then the audience won't be able to look away." On the laptop screen, Elijah scrolled slowly. Each click brought up another file. Code name, breed, final status, VX-04, Malinois, neural failure, internal termination, VX-06, German Shepherd, uncontrolled body discarded near station D14, VX-08, Dutch Shepherd, unconfirmed, no final footage, VX-09, Malinois, eliminated after triple reflex test. No one in the room spoke. Only the quiet tap of Clarissa's fingertip as she followed the printed list page by page. "How many are still alive?" Noah asked, his eyes never leaving the screen. Clarissa didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned to another sheet in the file stack. A preliminary table. Total VX series units trained. 27 confirmed terminated, 17 missing. Inconclusive, 6 transferred without formal record, 3 verified survivor, 1 Ash. Only 1 left, not discarded, not erased, not lost in the scattered testing outposts strung along the state's internal logistics routes. Elijah tapped the table once. In the internal documents Clarissa recovered, most are just summaries, test results, no source footage, no independent medical records, which means these deaths. He glanced at Noah, then finished flatly. "Were never investigated." Noah nodded, still staring at the name VX-06. A footnote appeared beneath it. "Body discarded near station D14. No formal report necessary." "No formal report," Noah repeated, as if asking the air. Clarissa's grip tightened around the paper in her hands. "Because they weren't considered animals," she said. "They weren't given civil registration. To them, VX units were internal assets, and when an asset fails, no one files a death certificate." Noah's hand froze. He turned to look at the room down the hall, door still slightly ajar. Ash was inside, sleeping or pretending, because Ash always listened. He had once been a string of code, a non-reportable unit. But now, he breathed, and there was an entire world that needed to hear his story. Elijah spoke, voice low and deliberate. "We're going to rewrite the names, one by one. Tell every story that was deleted. Not just for justice," he added, "but so these numbers don't die a second time in silence." 3 days after Elijah's first article went live, Noah's phone rang just before midnight. It wasn't a message, not a security alert. It was a call from Lieutenant Cheryl Mendez, Organized Crimes Division, Washington State. "We've reviewed the data," she said, voice flat. Not cold, not indifferent, just measured. "And we are officially opening a criminal case under temporary file ID VX-Case-019A. On the other end of the line, she brought up something Noah hadn't expected. Victor Sloan's name appeared in a sealed 2017 case file, but it was closed, before confirmation. "Why?" Noah asked. There was a pause. "Lack of living witnesses, no recovered remains, and someone requested internal declassification, high-level access." Noah gripped the phone tighter. "And now? Now we have all 3. A witness, a record, and Ash." Less than 6 hours later, another message appeared on Noah's screen. No hidden number, no blocked sender. From Victor Sloan. This is your last chance to turn back? Don't make a broken dog into a symbol. You have no idea what you're pulling up from the bottom. Either you stop, or I'll bring the whole system down with me, and this time VX-03 doesn't walk away. Noah stared at the screen. His fingers trembled slightly. Not from fear, but from fury. He didn't reply. Instead, he held the message, took a screenshot, and sent it directly to Cheryl. A minute later, she responded. Thank you. This is a direct threat against both the witness and the evidence. I'll enter it into the case file. It wasn't a promise of protection, but it was proof. He was no longer in the shadows. His name was now inked into the case. And this time, the evidence walked and looked straight into the past. Ash. VX-03, no longer just a number, no longer a flaw, but the reason the system couldn't keep existing the way it once had permission to. Seattle at night was damp and cold. The streetlights cast pale yellow halos across the mist-slicked pavement. Noah's car moved quietly through the city's veins. No music, no words, just the sound of steady breathing from the back seat. Ash was curled beneath an old blanket, his head resting lightly on his front paws. Eyes open. Not asleep. Not panicked anymore, but not at peace either. Like he knew this drive wasn't for leisure. It was a retreat, one born of survival. Noah didn't speak. He didn't need to. Ash had seen the phone call, the hurried footsteps, the way Noah closed the laptop, not in anger, but with a firm restraint, as if he was holding himself back from slamming any more doors before they had to go. Lisa lived on the edge of town, where the streetlights thinned, replaced by white fences and dew-covered lawns. She opened the door as soon as the car stopped. No questions, no searching look of concern. Just one step back, leaving enough space for both man and dog to enter. He knows me, Lisa said softly. I won't need a leash. Ash stepped out slowly. His eyes swept the scene, from the row of trees along the side yard to the porch mat worn thin, patterned with a faded dog bone. He didn't bark, didn't hesitate to go back. Noah stood still. The porch light framed Ash's silhouette on the stone tiles. Solid, clear, no longer the shadow of something conditioned by fear. Noah bent down and adjusted the scarf on Ash's back. Just a few days, he whispered. I need to clean up what's behind us, before I ever let you see it again. Ash touched his nose to Noah's wrist. Not hard, not long, just a quiet, brief contact, like the first time he remembered how to trust. Lisa placed a firm hand on Noah's shoulder. We're fine, she said. Go do what you need to do. Noah nodded. No words left to add. He turned, and just before the door closed behind him, he looked back. Ash was there, looking after him. Not growling, not whining, not afraid, just watching. And that was enough. Noah knew, Ash understood. 3:47 a.m. No sirens, no loudspeakers, no blue-red flashes streaking across the sky. Just dark, uniformed silhouettes moving through shadows, boots sinking into damp earth beside an old warehouse on the northern edge of the state. Forgotten by maps, untouched by time. The place Victor Sloan once called his conditioning sanctuary. The operation was coded and buried in a Special Investigations Bureau briefing. Clarissa had provided the location, what was left of it in her memory. Steel kennels buried half a meter underground, 3 iron doors linked by internal corridors, a basement with no blueprint. Lieutenant Mendez led the team. No words, just hand signals, 2 entry groups, west flank, technical maintenance hatch, absolute silence. The warehouse door was breached using hydraulic spreaders. No alarms, no shots, only one thing exploded. The air, thick with the stifled scent of old blood and industrial disinfectant. The first thing they saw was a long corridor, flickering fluorescent lights, walls painted in peeling silver white. Scratch marks gouged deep into the floor, claw marks, aged, embedded, running from one corner to a rusted cage door. Mendez gestured forward. 4 agents advanced. The first door opened, into the specimen archive room. Walls were lined with grainy black and white prints of dogs, each photo marked in red ink, VX-04, rejected VX-09, transferred/non-recoverable. VX-03, crossed out, no notes. The lower level was accessed using a cold cutter. White vapor hissed into the corridor, curling into the screams below, not barking, but hoarse, guttural shrieks, like instincts fractured beyond recognition. Flashlights swept the room. 12 steel kennels, each barely large enough for a single frail body, curled in on itself, unable to turn. Some lay motionless, eyes dulled by light they no longer registered. Others jolted upright, but instead of lunging, they cowered into corners, ears pinned back, eyes lost. Clarissa, part of the second unit, stood frozen in the middle of the hallway. "They don't understand what's happening," she whispered. "They're waiting for a signal." In the central room, Victor Sloan was apprehended as he attempted to torch a backup drive. He wore a gray protective coat, plastic gloves, hands shaking, not from cold. As he was restrained, he turned. Not toward Mendez, not toward the agents. He asked only one question. VX-03. Is he still following orders? No one answered. No answer was needed. Because just then, on a restored printer in the far corner, a line of recovered code flickered to life. VX-03. Out of system control. Status? Free. No one spoke for the first 20 minutes after they stepped into the second basement level. Flashlights swept across each steel kennel. Cold beams of light brushing over bodies that didn't respond with life, but with training. No howls, no growls, only the faint scratch of claws against metal, like a remnant of some long-rehearsed reflex still buried in a dulled nervous system. Each cage stood no taller than 5 feet, just long enough for an adult dog to lie curled on its side. No latches from within. Just a narrow slit, wide enough to slide in a stainless steel food tray. Above each kennel was a label window. No names, just codes. VX-11, VX-12, VX-14. Some had been painted over. Some remained untouched. Some were slashed through in thick red ink, deep enough to leave a scar in the steel. Clarissa stopped at Kennel 13. Inside was a black and rust shepherd, lying still, head resting on its paws, eyes open, but hollow. "This one," she choked out. "VX-13, disqualified during the emotional response trial, bit a handler's arm after responding to a whistle cue." Mendez recorded everything. On the wall nearby, a large diagram stretched across in color-coded blocks. Reflex conditioning bay command deviation, response deconditioning zone. At the far end, one final door, locked with an outdated keypad, a faded paper label still taped to the frame. Testing room, Phase X. They breached it with a technical override. Inside, 4 heavy-gauge chains bolted to the floor, acoustic padding on the walls, a ceiling-mounted audio emitter with remote control microphone, infrared surveillance camera mounted in the corner. Noah, called in by police once the perimeter was secure, entered last. He didn't take photos, didn't write anything down. He just looked, letting his eyes linger across every groove worn into the wall, every rusted streak where blood had dried on steel pipes, every cage, not as a container for beasts, but as a vault that held the pain of souls trained to obey until they broke themselves. Clarissa gripped the doorway. We didn't save all of them, but we have to tell all of them. And at the very end, one cage stood empty. No scratch marks, no blood. Just a fallen ID plate on the floor, thin dust coating the surface. It read, VX-03, subject relocated, no longer in system. In the archive room at the far end of the basement corridor, 3 officers quietly lifted a tall vault from against the back wall. Dust coated its surface so thickly it looked like no one had touched it in years. Or maybe no one had dared open it again. Clarissa was the first to recognize the code engraved on the vault's front. D9VXX, an internal series. Deep archive storage. The kind of vault built to hold things even its creators didn't want to reread. The door groaned open with a dry, rusted rasp. Inside were thick bundles of documents, bound by coarse string and marked manually in red ink. One black-spined file was pulled first. Elijah, present to oversee data extraction, flipped through the pages quickly until he stopped. His finger landed on a line. VX-03, temporary name, ASH, assigned by out-of-system personnel. Training history, anomalously stable, multidimensional reflexes, sensitive to metallic audio triggers, non-compliant with standardized attack protocols, exhibited non-commanded response during Phase 10. Current status: out of system control. Note: high risk of behavioral contagion. Noah read the last line. His lips lifted slightly, not a smile, just the quiet recognition that what they once called a risk was the very thing that had kept Ash alive. Clarissa exhaled softly. They used to call him a disruptive asset, a defect. Elijah turned more pages. One entry was handwritten, no system code attached. VEX-03 exhibits voluntary de-escalation when encountering non-threatening contact. Poor compatibility with hunger-driven aggression or blind signal punishment protocols. Noah murmured. So, it wasn't that he couldn't respond. He just refused to respond wrong. They kept reading. In the section labeled Behavioral Projection Post-System Breach, only one sentence appeared. VX-03 will return to the nearest anchoring presence previously established. Noah reread it. Again. And again. Then he closed the file and placed it back inside the box. He didn't need more proof. Because right then, his phone lit up. A message from Lisa. Ash is okay, but every time the door opens, he turns to look down the hall, like he knows you'll come back. Noah pressed his lips together. The files might call it risk of behavioral contagion. They might name Ash a malfunction. They might flag him as no longer within system compliance. But no one held control anymore. Not because Ash had lost his reflexes, but because Ash had chosen not to follow commands anymore. The news didn't make the front page the next morning. No bold headlines, no mugshots and handcuffs. Just a short, tucked-away line buried in the morning bulletin. An illegal canine training operation using violent conditioning methods was dismantled in Washington. Primary suspect Victor Sloan was apprehended on site. 5 accomplices remain under international warrant. A network of military-grade animal conditioning protocols has been exposed. But for Noah, Clarissa, and Elijah, they didn't need headlines. They needed files. And now, the files were open. Victor was escorted in an armored vehicle, no handcuffs on camera, but his eyes had changed. The arrogance was gone. What remained was a vacant stare. The look of a man who had just lost the one power that kept him upright. The power to give commands. Without being questioned. He didn't resist, didn't shout. He only turned his head, looked behind him, and saw Clarissa standing there, unbowed. Elijah stood beside her, handheld camera steady. No zoom, no theatrics. but just enough to capture the moment when the man behind the cold chain of command now had no one left to obey him. Later that same day, a list of names entered the global warrant database. Kurt Dieter, architect of extreme reflex testing protocols. Madeline Ray, internal data manager and expert in file disappearance. Ryu Oda, once ran a mirrored facility in East Asia. Giovanni Marchetti held the financial reins. Cassandra Lorne, former inspector, personally signed insufficient evidence on at least 11 separate cases. No more encryption, no more internal-only files, no more systems strong enough to hide them from the light. Noah read the list on his phone, sitting on the front bench outside Lisa's house. Ash lay at his feet, eyes closed, ears twitching now and then as the night breeze moved through. No leash, no collar, just a dog relearning what peace feels like. Noah ran his hand slowly along Ash's back, then whispered, softly, for no one but him to hear. "They know your name now, but no one calls you a tool anymore. From now on, if anyone asks, I'll tell them. Ash didn't come from a command. You're the evidence. You're the answer." Ash didn't move, just breathed. But Noah knew. He understood. Ash Haven wasn't built as a center. It was built as an apology for creatures who didn't know how to demand justice and for pieces of memory once dismissed as system errors. Noah bought a small plot of land on the eastern outskirts of Seattle, once an old agricultural warehouse, abandoned for over a decade. Jagged, brown brick walls, roof tiles broken here and cracked there, the backyard grass wild, knee-high. And Noah stood there, holding a simple blueprint folded into quarters. Beside him, a Malinois lay in the afternoon sun, eyes half closed. Ash, not VX-03, not a leftover product, just Ash, with steady breath and a heartbeat no longer wired to training signals. Ash Haven took nearly a year to build. No billboards, no sponsors, just trucks arriving week by week, carrying materials, and long days where Noah nailed each kennel frame by hand, brushed every coat of paint, planted frost-hardy shrubs around the yard. Clarissa contributed to the behavioral rehabilitation design. She knew what made a dog curl up when someone touched its nape. Elijah sent over files from other states, cases needing refuge. A service dog retired after terrorized by sirens post-bombing. A shepherd returned 3 times for refusing to enter confined spaces. A dog who lost an eye after an owner's fire reflex experiment. They were all welcomed under one guiding principle. No questions about the past, no pressure on the present, just space to start over. Ash Haven had no command bells. Only a wide grass yard, double-sided open kennels, a sound therapy room, and a small wooden sign hanging by the gate. Ash Haven, where wounds don't need proof. And the man behind it, no longer a broken engineer broken by loss. Noah Carter no longer led. He walked beside them, all the creatures once taught to respond only to pain. The opening day of Ash Haven had no banners, no news cameras, no grand speeches, just early sunlight pouring through roadside trees, and a small yard where 10 people stood, scattered. A few volunteers, an elderly couple from Oregon who once cared for a dog rejected for too much sensitivity, a young reporter from an independent pet magazine, and Lisa, coffee cup still steaming in hand. Noah stood by the porch, eyes fixed on the gate slowly opening. He wore no suit, just a rolled-up shirt, worn khakis, and dusty shoes, the marks of a year spent rebuilding what no one else dared. Beside him was Ash, no collar, no leash, just 2 beings standing side by side, a man and a dog, needing no commands, no signs. Ash no longer padded nervously like those early days. He walked slowly, ears erect, tail relaxed, not tucked, not wagging, simply at ease, as if to say, "I don't need to be on guard, but I'm still watching." When Noah stepped toward the gate, Ash followed, not tugging, not pulling. He walked on the left, the spot once programmed as the reflex corridor, but now moved by habit, by safety learned. Together they crossed the small lawn, past pale brown open kennels. A few other dogs watched quietly. A shepherd missing his tail lifted his head. A Doberman shifted softly in the shade. No barking, no chaos, just a quiet welcome among souls who had known pain. Noah stopped mid-yard. Ash stopped beside him. He bent down, placing a gentle hand on Ash's back, not holding. Ash didn't shy away, didn't flinch, just turned his head to glance up, eyes clear, alert, at peace. "Welcome to Ash Haven," Noah spoke without a microphone. "This is a place where no one asks, 'What did you do?' We only ask, 'From now on, how do you want to live?'" Ash lifted his head, eyes meeting the applause from the small crowd. Then, without any cue, he stepped forward, standing tall. Not stretching, not straining. Just a dog knowing he was finally seen with the respect he deserved. After the opening, people slowly drifted away. The sound of footsteps on the grass grew sparse. Soft barks echoed, not from fear, but as a familiar reflex to strangers crossing new thresholds. Only Noah, Ash, and Lisa remained. Lisa was the last to walk the grounds. She stopped before the entrance, where a small, dark wooden plaque hung, its edges slightly chipped. The letters weren't copper-plated, nor were they printed. They were hand-carved, rough and uneven, as if the carver didn't care about perfection. Just that it was real enough. "Here, no past is needed to start again." Lisa ran a fingertip over the deep grooves, then turned to Noah. "Did you write this for Ash?" Noah stood beside her quietly, shaking his head. "No," he said, eyes still fixed on the plaque. "For all of them. For those once called by codes, left on the system's margins. For the humans carrying wounds no photo could capture. And for myself." Ash sat by his feet, eyes fixed on the open gate, no longer fenced, only wooden steps leading to peaceful grounds. Noah looked down at Ash, then lifted his gaze. "We all have pasts, but not all of us want to speak of them. Here, we don't ask." Lisa nodded, understanding, because she too carried stories no one asked for, and didn't need to. The afternoon waned. Sunlight drifted across the porch, touching the carved words. Ash's shadow stretched across the threshold, mingling with Noah's. No line divided man and dog. Just two beings who chose to stay. Not because this place was safe, but because here they no longer needed to prove anything. There was no ceremony to announce Ash as a therapy dog. No certificate, no special badge clipped to a collar, because Ash didn't need one. He simply did what he had always done. Step beside someone trembling, and stay. Ash Haven began welcoming veterans and trauma survivors struggling with PTSD the following spring. Some came because they had nowhere else to go. Some because they refused to take another pill. Some because they had seen Ash's eyes through Elijah's article. No one was ushered straight into therapy. They were invited to sit outside in the yard, among open kennels, rustling leaves, and Ash's shadow, silently passing by. No one led him, no one called him. He walked as if he knew who needed him, not rushing forward, not licking hands, just settling close enough to hear breaths, but far enough to not frighten. A veteran named Marcus was the first to share his story with Lisa during a group session. "I hadn't slept deeply since October 2 years ago. The first night here, I woke at 2 a.m. from a seizure. Thought I was losing control again. But when I sat up, Ash was right outside my door. No barking, no coming in, just lying at the edge, head on his paws. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid, because I knew he didn't react to my fear like a flaw. Ash didn't know how to perform. No shaking hands, no rolling over, no playing dead. But he knew when to sit close to someone, knew when just to breathe, and let a hand quietly rest on a back without judgment. Perhaps Ash's greatest gift wasn't erasing others' pain, but making them not feel ashamed for still carrying it. People called him a therapy dog. But Ash didn't know those words. All he knew was staying by someone's side, while that person was still learning how not to abandon themselves. The back room behind the operations office, once an old storage closet, had been lovingly restored by Lisa's own hands. The wooden walls were stripped clean and painted a soft shade of blue. A window opened onto the quiet backyard, where a few lavender bushes peeked shyly through the white picket fence. There was no exam table, no swiveling chair, just two cozy armchairs pressed against the wall, a low bookshelf filled with notebooks, colorful boxes, and wooden models designed for children with autism. In the center lay a round rug, where Ash would sometimes lie beside whoever sat across without a single word spoken. Lisa never called this a counseling room. Instead, she hung a small wooden sign on the door, hand-carved with the words, "A place to sit down, for no reason at all." She began welcoming the first visitors. No questions about names, no mandatory notes taken. Only one rule: they could speak or remain silent. But they had to sit for at least 10 minutes. And in most of those quiet minutes, Ash was the first to break the silence. Not with a bark, but with his gentle breathing. Clarissa returned to Ash Haven in early autumn, carrying an old suitcase and a bag full of leashes. Gone was the closed-off face from her first visit. She didn't ask to teach. She asked to help undo what she had once helped create. "The new dogs don't need training," she said. "They need to hear their own voices again." Noah gave her full control over the small east yard, the place where Ash had once basked in the sun during his first days. Clarissa began simply by standing among 5 or 6 dogs of different breeds, each returned for being too difficult to control, and waited. She learned to sit down before they decided to stand. She looked up at them, as whole beings, not broken tools. No commands to wag tails, no waiting for positive responses, just a silent plea that they wouldn't recoil when she reached out. Gradually, the dogs who once seemed impossible began turning their heads when called by their real names for the first time in their lives. Not VX, not Case 12, but Rowan, Luca, Sky, Emery. Ash watched from outside the fence, occasionally stepping in to circle the yard, gently nudging the neck of a shepherd who'd curled up. No threat, no pressure, just a quiet message. "I've been where you are." Clarissa looked up and smiled softly. "We did it wrong before. Now, at least, we're here to do it right." The book was released quietly. No press conferences, no signing tours. Just a simple gray cover, the title printed in worn serif letters, "The One Who Turned Back" by Elijah Rudd. No illustrations, no flashy taglines, only a small dedication on the first page for the first living being I ever saw turn back, not because he was called by name, but because he chose to. Ash. Elijah never called it an investigative report, though over a third of its pages contained classified documents, copies of training records, excerpts from testimonies, and behavioral expert interviews. He called it a book about what every system tried to hide, that there are souls who refuse to stay silent, even when trained to never raise their voices. The opening chapter, VX-03. The One Who Didn't Turn Back, began with Elijah witnessing Ash's first quiet growl, and then his choice not to charge forward, but to step back behind Noah. Conditioned reflexes attack, untamed instincts flee, but Ash chose to stand still, trembling, yet refusing to retreat further. The book spread swiftly through professional circles, not for its prose, but for the profound silence Ash embodied amidst all the noise. Some military training centers labeled it dangerous material. Some veterinary psychologists called it a rare special case. But those who had cared for abused dogs said they saw themselves in Ash's eyes. The book went into its third printing within 3 months. Not because Ash became an internet sensation, but because Ash never asked to be told. His story taught people what no manual could ever teach. Turning back is not weakness. It is the ultimate proof of freedom. One passage toward the end read, "There was a dog, trained to charge on command, who chose instead to turn back toward a person who never gave orders. And that made me believe no one is beyond saving." That afternoon, the wind whispered through the backyard of Ash Haven, stirring dry leaves across the soft grass. The air was crisp, the sunlight a thin sliver slipping behind the trees. Ash lay beneath the porch in his familiar pose, head resting on his front paws, eyes half closed. Not guarding, not waiting for a command. Just present, a silent part of this place's heartbeat. A small car pulled up at the gate. Lisa was the first to step out, followed by a woman and a boy, about 8 years old, tousled brown hair, shoulders hunched into a gray hoodie, hands gripping a soft rubber block tightly. The boy's name was Evan, diagnosed with autism at 3. He didn't like to be touched, didn't meet eyes, didn't respond to calls. His mother sat beside him on a worn wooden bench at the edge of the yard. Lisa whispered, "There's nothing to ask for." Just to show him that here, no one demands anything from him. Ash didn't rise. He only opened his eyes and slowly stepped down the porch stairs. No rush, no direct approach. He circled gently, as if avoiding confrontation, simply walking alongside Evan, showing a quiet companionship. The boy glanced up briefly, then lowered his head again. Silence stretched. Ash stopped 2 steps away and sat down. He turned his back to Evan. No invitation, no plea for affection, just, "If you want, I am here." 1 minute passed, then another. No birds, no distant traffic, only the faintest breath from the boy. Evan raised his hand, very slowly, trembling, and touched the thick, warm fur on Ash's back. Not a squeeze, not a pat, just a small palm, resting like a quiet language beyond words. Ash didn't turn back, didn't glance over. He only tilted his head slightly, enough for Evan to see that his eyes held no command, no reaction, only understanding. No translator needed, no validation necessary that this was a step toward healing, only Noah, pausing from afar. Lisa, hand to her mouth, eyes moist. Clarissa, silent by the wooden gate. And Ash, no bark, no wagging tail, just breathing, slow, full, steady. As if saying, if you need someone to understand you before you learn to speak, then you don't need to say a thing at all. Ash's story is not just about the healing journey of a wounded dog. It's a mirror reflecting the patience, understanding, and capacity for forgiveness of a creature we often call a pet. The German Shepherd, intelligent, loyal, brave, yet also one of the most vulnerable breeds when in the hands of those who fail to realize that even a warrior's heart has its limits. Ash stands for hundreds, even thousands of dogs trained to be tools. But deep in those eyes, there lives a soul quietly waiting for someone to see them as what they truly are, a being worthy of love. Ash Haven has proven this. No one is ever too broken to start again. No fear is too great to be soothed if only we have the patience to stay. And no bond runs deeper than the gaze shared between a human and a dog, when both choose trust instead of commands. Love animals not just because they are loyal, but because they teach us how to become worthy of that loyalty. And if a creature once reduced to a mere code can relearn how to love, then surely we too can relearn to live better with greater kindness and compassion.